You have now arrived at your destination.
Des, this is such a joy to do. As you know, I've been a long-term admirer, fan, so thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me yet again.
Not at all. I do want to start, though, with a little bit of context. So we see Intercom in all of its glory today. What was that founding aha moment for you and the team with Intercom?
I think we had a few different ideas. So we were originally a consultancy building software for other people. There was a few ideas on the go. Ones that at times looked hilariously bad. Like we had an idea for like a whiteboarding product and that ultimately looked like not a good idea contrasted with Intercom. But then something like Miro comes out like years later and you're like, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea. However, with Intercom, we're building an actual way to communicate with our customers from our previous product, and we wanted to communicate inside the product. And the real sort of spark was like when we realized how much more effective that was and how people were just quite excited about that. I remember Owen at the time, our former CEO, current chairperson, saying to Kieran like that this could actually be a huge idea by itself, this little talk to customers in your product type thing. And when I heard that, my response whenever I think, oh, could this be an idea? I just immediately go into like, let's like, what's the actual strongest like Iron Man case we can put to support this? Or steel man case. So I was like, right, what are the trends, whether it's messaging or whether it's like the rise of web software, whether it's the rise of SaaS and the need for relationships. I started to look at, right, okay, this fits, it supports so many current sort of tectonic shifts. And then obviously the real click was once we actually offered it to other people and we saw them use it and we saw them like rip it out of our hands and be like, oh my God, I love this thing. How did my life exist without it type thing? That was when it was like, right, clearly we're onto something. And that was the decision then to like, close the consultancy, let's get going and let's go all in on this.
So I want to touch on something you said there first, which is kind of the idea selection process for you. VCs always say, oh, it's all about the people, it's all about the people. I don't care if I hate your idea, if I believe in you so much. I've invested many times. And actually it was Elizabeth Yin on Twitter who said the other day, no, like actually the quality of the idea really matters and you have to be excited about it. Which camp are you in? Are you in like the fuck it, great founders find the market and find the product over time? Or do you have to like what they're doing when you invest?
I think this is like gonna not be a satisfying answer. I look at the multiple, like the quality of founder times the quality of the idea. But if you're telling me I can only have one, I'll definitely pick the quality founder over the quality idea. Because I think ideas are only good until you say them out loud, and then all of a sudden everyone hears about it. So like there's an Intercom spin out right now called Equals, right? And Equals basically it connects spreadsheets like Excel. It is a spreadsheet and it connects to like data warehousing. And apparently that's a huge idea. And everyone who's ever used a spreadsheet, the first question you ask them is, do you connect it to other sources of information? And they're like, oh, well, I take an export from a Snowflake and import. The very second they hear that idea, they're like, I'm in, I want it. Let me invest, let me buy. I want the product right now. But now that idea is out there. So if all you had was that idea, there's going to be at least 100 other people trying to copy that idea and do it quicker than you and better than you. And if they care about it more than you or they're just better than you, they're going to ghost you. So being first doesn't matter. And I think like there's some attachment to the idea of like the uniqueness of the idea is only useful in a world where being first matters. And I think it's very rare you can sustain the head start if somebody else is either better funded, just better resourced, more passionate, and all you are is the guy who came up with the idea.
Sorry, can you unpack that being first doesn't matter? Because is there not someone else who's always better suited? Like Google could put their mind to any idea, resource it better than you, and you're fucked.
I don't actually think that that's true. I think like Google have like tried to put their mind to like God knows how many things, and you still see the emergence of God knows how many products. Like why isn't Slack part of the G Suite? It's because they can't put their mind to that. Why does Figma exist? Because they can't put their mind to that. Like why is Superhuman doing well? Because they can't put their mind to that. So I don't think I think it's like in a case of Google, it's more like what do they actually prioritize? And the answer is their core businesses, of which they have like 5 or 6 or 7, like YouTube, G Suite, I don't know, whatever else, search, ads, blah blah blah, right? I think being first doesn't matter is another way of saying, let's say me and you have a really dope idea for a really smart take on project management, and it involves, let's say, if you want to wind the clock back, let's say it involves like the idea of a metaphor of post-it notes that you can drag and drop around the place. Give it a year and everyone will have it. If it makes sense, give it a year and everyone will have it. And then what are you left with? And if what you're left with is, well, we had it first, and you start running advertising campaigns saying the original, you're kind of like, you're screwed, because like no one actually cares. Like when you pick up your phone, you don't really care, is this the first touch screen or not? Turns out it wasn't, but it doesn't matter. Like the question is, can you sustain your advantage? And I think if all you are is a person who had the idea, but you don't have that much passion, or you don't have that much ability, or whatever, anything there, I don't think like a mediocre person with a unique idea will work.
I don't believe in defensibility on day one. As you said there, I think anyone
Mhm.
can have an idea. And there's lots of people who have relevant backgrounds. But I think, like I see with my own media business, defensibility is built over time in the
Yeah.
processes that we do, in the products that we build subsequent. Do you agree
Mhm.
with like defensibility on day one doesn't really exist?
I think like real defensibility, no, it does not exist. I think like there are a few apps. I mean, like I'm just trying to think of a good example. Like Figma might be one, or like Zenly, the Snapchat app.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, things where it's like really beautifully crafted, really high end engineering, and really hard to copy. Like those sort of products, when you see them first, you're like, it's going to take a long time to get to where these people are today. And like the way I describe that in like startup, when I'm talking to startup companies who are looking for me to invest, is I describe the length of the road to the starting line. And I would call, if you say you want to compete with Figma, I'd say, Jesus, Harry, that is a long road to the starting line,
Well,
which
they were
basically
they were
means,
like 3 years in the dark.
yeah,
No offense, VCs had almost written them off because they were like, "What are
yeah,
these guys doing?"
yeah.
Like,
Absolutely. And it's the same when you say like, oh, we're going to work on a new email client. I'm like, yep, long road to the starting line. Because I'm like, I can tell you what your first 2 years of roadmap is. And then at the end of that, can you add something unique on top? Who knows, right? So I think like day one defensibility is rare, but every now and then some company does emerge with something that you're like, wow, if you want to copy that, you'll be a long time working on that. And it might be like a year and a half, or in Figma's case, as you said, like 2+ years. I think anyone who's like, right, like let's say Adobe probably saw Figma and they're probably smart enough to go, wow, this is a threat to one of our big cash cows. And if they dispatched a team of their brightest, which I'm not saying they did or didn't, uh, and they went at it full time, in 2 years' time, they'd have to hope that Figma somehow froze to give them that much time to catch up. And Figma ain't freezing, and Dylan's too smart a guy to like not make monster progress.
so do you like it when a startup comes to you and pitches a long road to the starting line because it is defensible?
If they know what they're doing, yeah, definitely. The only sort of test I'd say there is sometimes, like my advice in those cases is work on your differentiators first. So in the case of say an email client, oh, we have a new take on email, I would say, right, here's what I believe. I believe you're a competent engineer. I believe you can work out SMTP and IMAP and spam filtering and all that. Like, let's just push all that aside. I don't want to see a single engineer work on that. Show me the thing you're going to build that's actually new to market. Even if the email stuff doesn't work, right? I don't care. Like, I'm sure you'll solve the rich text editor problem, but I need to see the difference early. Don't tell me after 2 years' time, we finally caught up with Gmail, and now with 3 months of runway left, we're going to add in the thing that makes us different. It's a waste of time. You have to actually like acid test the differentiators first. But in general, I'm not against it. We have to go dark for like 2 years to produce something monster. I don't have a concern with that.
When you're looking at like new angel investments, I think the biggest mistakes I've always made are market sizing. I
Mhm.
underestimate the size of the market, or I actually think it's bigger than it is and it's actually smaller. Do you engage in market sizing analysis thinking? Do you think it's even worth it if we all acknowledge that we always underestimate how big markets are?
I don't engage in it, and the reason is like the checks I write. So this is where me and you're slightly different in that like the volume and the size of the check is probably slightly off. You're larger than me in both ways. But so for me, like if it was like left-handed dentists in Dublin, yeah, I'm not going to invest, right? Like, but if it's I only need the market probably to be like around 1 billion of like total revenue spent for this seed check to turn into a valuable Series A or whatever. It doesn't need to be a monster. However, the way I actually do it is not like by because startups, the founders will often come at you with like crazy like projections and like Gartner estimates and all that. Like what I actually try to look for is just basically what is the problem. Well, what is the problem you solve? How many people have that problem, and how big a problem is it to the people who have it? Like, a big problem to me is something that happens often and matters a lot. So, like, I don't know, email, like communicating with your work colleagues. Like, these are like big problems. Talking to your customers, that's a pretty frequently occurring problem that you'll probably spend money on. Whereas when someone says, "Oh, this is like the app that checks in to see how your employees are doing on the third weekend of every week, whatever. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't sound like as big of a problem. So I'm going to put that into the very low category. And in that world, I'd want to see near perfect execution, because the only way that market makes sense is if you own all of it. If that ends up being like a sort of a cottage industry of like 15 different bootstraps companies, and you're like going to take one slice of it, then we're into like, you might tap out at $15 million in ARR and you're asking for a seed at a value of 40. You know, that's like where I'm like, right, I'm out. But honestly, I'm out there earlier than the market size. I'm out because I'm just not that interested, because it doesn't sound really big, you know.
Okay, final one, and then because this is totally off schedule.
Yeah, it's
like,
okay.
Like CAC and LTV, I just think it's hilarious when like seed and Series A companies kind of pitch it. And it's like they will change completely over time. Like this profile is cheaper than that profile. This cohort is totally different.
Totally.
How do you think about like the importance of like CAC to LTV and metrics like that at the early stage? Irrelevant, don't bother.
It's not that like they are relevant. I just don't think most startups are like. I think if someone's coming to you at that earlier stage and they've a really like dialed read on their CAC LTV, I'm like, how is that important? Like, why are you working on that versus working on like building a great product? Like, I think all these numbers matter, but they matter at scale. They just don't matter early on. What I'm way more interested in is how are you going to get customers in a way that your competitors can't? And if their answer is like, oh, we're going to outbid them for CAC LTV, then sure, let's dig into that. But like, if the answer is like, you know, thought leadership, I'm like, right, show me sort of thought leadership you're going to do. If it's like, oh, we're going to do YouTube, all right, let's show me an example of a video or whatever. The conversation that where most startups fail out is not the efficiency of CAC LTV. It's a blank face after I say, do you have a differentiated route to customers, or are you just going to be bidding it out with the rest of them?
So sorry, I'm jumping in. I agree with you. I ask the exact same thing as a distribution mind like you. Totally. I just never hear the answer that I want. I'm literally 99.9% unsatisfied.
Yeah, the only times I've been satisfied is when the best way I could describe it is like when it's a closed industry. So like when I was talking to the folks at Hopins, they're like, well, we need to just reach every event organizer on Earth and every company that organizes events on Earth, and we actually have we like, not quite their words, we've kind of got those lists already. And I'm like, so we're not like the first 3/4 of most marketing teams' efforts were already passed, which is find the people. We have found the people. Now we need to have compelling reasons to get them to use it. And it's going to be an outbound campaign, and it's going to be expensive, and we're going to be sending them gift baskets, and we're going to be doing all that stuff to try and get them to pay attention to us. But that's ultimately the plan. Then I'm like, right, that makes sense. I believe you're working in a closed market, and I believe you can actually identify all of your targets. It's just different when someone says we're selling to startups, you know, because their plan is go number one on Hacker News and repost on Product Hunt every 2 days.
Yeah, no, listen, I'm totally with you. We've spoken about your angel investing. You said something before, being that angel investing is good for active operators.
Yeah.
Why do you think so, Des?
Yeah, so I think since I wrote my very first check in the very first company, which is a company called Workable, it's a recruitment software company, and I've probably written like 50 or 60 since. I think a few things I've learned. One is like how little tolerance you have for excuses when they're outside of your business versus when they're inside of your business. So when someone tries to pitch me on a thing and they say, oh, well, the reason it hasn't taken off yet is because, oh, well, we had to like, you know, let go of our VP of engineering and we've got a new one now and she's awesome, blah, blah. Like, I just net all that out to, we couldn't get it done. So, and I make my decision based on that. And yet, if internally someone's asking me why did such and such a thing happen, I'm immediately going into the same mode of, oh, well, we couldn't, blah, blah, blah. And like, so I think it's definitely sharpened my sort of appreciation of how other people will see Intercom. I think that's one whole piece. I think secondly, seeing the internals of other companies and learning how they make decisions is really useful from understanding an Intercom buyer's perspective. Like, is in under what grounds would you adopt Intercom? And like, kind of relatively speaking, in all of the priorities in your world, how important are we? Because we're, you know, in our heads, we're all, you know, in your head, like you're the number one podcast on everyone's list or whatever. But in practice, you're in amongst 5 others, right? Similarly, like with Intercom, we think, oh, well, surely they've got at least 10 people talking about Intercom on a daily basis. But no, it's actually just Joey in the corner working on in-apps or whatever, you know? So like, so I think getting a sense of your own importance as you rank in other companies is useful as well.
How does angel investing give you that perspective?
So I guess literally writing the check doesn't, but the time you spend with the founder does. So I usually, like, you know, my take on how I angel invest is I try to spend as little time scheduled as possible, but a lot of time unscheduled. And by unscheduled, I mean asynchronous email or whatever, right? So, because I've always been interested in startups. I just love them. I love seeing businesses grow. I love diagnosing why businesses are sort of flatlining or struggling. And so what the check does is kind of gets you a stream of information about like a new Sudoku that you can kind of try to unravel, and you can throw in suggestions, or you can see the inside of, like, as is the case in some of the investments, like you just get to see inside a rocket ship that's just humming, and you see people don't think this is true, but I'm humble enough to say, yes, Intercom is like a series, whatever, like D or whatever company. We don't need to raise, so hence it's not E or F or whatever. But I can learn a lot from a Series A or B person, because like when they're wonderful executors, they're wonderful executors. I've invested in companies that have like gone on to surpass the valuation of Intercom many times over, and the founders have turned into absolute monster CEOs and monster COOs along the way. And so you learn a lot from seeing success and how that performs.
If you look at those ones that have absolutely blown it away, is there one company and one CEO which has shown you the most, and what have they shown you?
So I'll answer this in a slightly different way. So like I've invested in companies like, let's say, like, Stripe is on one end, right? Like, of just like a total absolute outlier. But I'm not going to say blah blah blah, because like everyone knows Stripe, and it's kind of too easy. But a company where I've seen it that had say more close access and watched it take off was, say, Miro, with Andre Cusidas, the CEO there. They've just been an execution machine for a really specific problem, and they kind of stood up against an external, what could have been a threat in FigJam, and they've done really well through that as well. So that's a company where I've just watched it pretty much from early doors really do well. Another one which is like earlier.
Sorry, I'm clicking now. What do you think they did well? Is it just speed of execution?
Focus and speed of execution. So I think for like, the easiest thing for a company like Miro to do, I think, is to get notions about becoming Microsoft Office and starting to branch out and becoming a document editor and all that sort of stuff, because everyone tells you need to go to become a multi-platform suite, blah blah blah. Like, you get all the kind of like the narrative of expand your TAM now, etc., etc. Maybe that's the right thing for them to do, but what they have actually spent all their time doing is perfecting, like online multiplayer whiteboarding, and I think that's a really important thing for them to do. So like that I think, like, this, I'd say it is probably a focused, intense execution, without like letting their kind of like newfound status distract them from it. Because when you start if you used to sit down with a journalist and say why you're now worth whatever $1 billion they're worth, you feel obliged to say all this new shit, right? Like, you feel obliged to say, well, we're actually going to become there's a metaverse play, and we're thinking about augmented reality, and we're releasing some hardware. Like, that's like the easiest thing to do, say all this dope shit so you sound famous. But actually, just the intensity of the execution there has just been awesome.
I knew that I was smoking my own shit when I said I was elevating the consciousness of investments. I was like, fuck me, Harry, you've been watching too much Adam Newman. Speaking of that, though, I mean, we're kind of brilliantly intermingling schedules here, but I'm pleased with this. You said there about kind of expanding sooner or beyond into text editors and more than you should do. Product question-wise, it's fucking hard. When is the right time to release a second product? How do you advise founders on that?
I'm always hesitant to give any like super structured advice, because there's just so much tacit knowledge you get in the building. But the things I would say to think about are basically like, one is like, a lot of this is going to be kind of boring and tactical, but I think that's honestly what a lot of listeners come to you for.
Yeah.
One thing you'd have to look at is like, so starting with the boring shit, can we actually recruit enough engineers and designers and PMs to actually own a second product in a way that doesn't harm the first product? Because that first product still needs new people as well. You need backfills, you need to continue the investment there. So one whole piece is just very tactical. It's like, can we get the team in? And oftentimes that comes from opening a second office or from acquiring an acquihire or something like that. But like, are we going to be able to get the people in a way that doesn't cannibalize the success on what is currently the only thing we have that works? And so that's one whole piece of calculus. Are we ready to do it from a staff side? Then separately, do we credibly believe, and this is a two-parter here. One is like, can we definitely, is the ROI of adding a new product definitely greater than increasing the maturity and possibly the TAM by like going up market or whatever of the current thing we have? So if we have a project management tool and someone wants us to do a time tracking tool, are we sure that doing the time tracking tool is going to be adding more value to the overall business than just really nailing this project management tool or whatever it is, right? And then thirdly, is there value in doing both of these things under the same company? Like, and this is a question of like brand architecture in a sense, right? Because if you think, hey, I can find a second team and they're going to go and do this other thing, why not just start a second startup, right? There has to be some like multiplicative value where actually both products end up like with unfair advantages because of their cohabitation. And I think like you have to believe, so they have to share either a source of truth, customer record or something like that. They have to have some sort of shared entities and shared workflows and shared UI. That means that you can do the second product better than some random person off the street could do it, and that your customers ideally will buy it off you because they prefer that advantage too. So like the first trigger point for me is always like, are we sure we're tapped out with what we're currently doing, or like maybe a tapped out's probably too negative word. Are we very confident in the trajectory towards a really successful outcome for product A? And then if product B, are we ready to hire for product B? And then if we're picking B, are we sure we can do it in a way that doesn't hurt A? Are we sure that it's valuable and it's more valuable than just simply continuing on A? And then lastly, does A plus B, like is that multiplicative or is that additive? Are you going to get like, are you basically adding two things together, or are you multiplying two things?
I want to start on number one there in terms of the resourcing with the engineers and the team needed. I'm always in two minds when it comes to second products. Do you do the skinny budget MVP, test and iterate in a very lean manner? Or do you really allocate resources to it and concentrate capital, because you should do if it's a meaningful effort for you? How do you think about that two-minded process?
I actually think you have to do both. I think you have to prove out that you have some actual like alpha in them. That you can do something that no one else can do. So like going back to the idea of like ship your differentiators first. Like show me this thing working. Like so let's say I don't know. Let's say a project management tool and you want to do like whatever HR tool. Show me why are you better than like Workday or Bamboo or Humans or whatever, right? Like give me something that says that you're like that this is actually worth building and it's actually new to market as opposed to new to your company. And then if you can show that, then I think you actually have to throw the full set of resources at it. Now, this is where the advice would differ depending on the stage of the company. But like if Intercom launches a surveys tool, which we did in March, we can't be like limping in with an MVP that doesn't work. It would actually be brand damaging. We need to it needs to have all of the traits of Intercom, which means in context, AI, ML, reporting, mobile plus web, blah, blah, blah. Like there's like some kind of like default assumptions we want our customers to make when they see the Intercom logo, and we need to meet all of that, which means you have to fully resource it, because otherwise, whereas like a Y Combinator startup would just eke away one feature at a time, we'd do brand damage if we asked if we asked one of our largest customers, let's say Atlassian or whatever, hey, we have a new surveys product, why don't you give it a try? And they try it and it doesn't work, or it only has one feature. They're like, mother of God, what are we paying you for? So you have to kind of make sure that like your release matches the sort of brand posture that you want to have with your customers.
I like that a lot, and I actually hadn't thought about that in terms of the different staging of the companies and how people perceive the brand. I want to touch on that. You mentioned obviously the new product that you released there. I think we learn from our mistakes often. When you think about the new products that you've released, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've made when releasing or contemplating releasing new products? And how did that impact your mindset?
I think one area that's most difficult to think about is what is a product versus what is just a paid upgrade to your existing platform. And like, under what grounds should you say like this is a new product, or this is just an extra tab that you pay an extra few dollars to unlock? And I think in general, there are loads of arguments as to when you should do one versus the other. Usually it's around like, does it have a distinct buyer that for whom the other product wouldn't appeal to? And if so, do you have a cross-sell, upsell plan? Like how do you make sure that these people hear about each other and buy it, such that it doesn't end up just being an entirely separate line of business? I think so. And we've made mistakes there. We've definitely made mistakes there. We've confused products with features and features with products, and we've had to unroll that and fix that back again. And then I think
How do you know whether it's a feature or a product? I often have this with founders where I sound like the douche VC when I say I think it's a feature, not a product, and they get fuck you.
Yeah, I think so I totally agree, and I think with if you're looking at it from the venture capitalist's point of view, or even maybe like from the CEO's point of view, you might be tempted to think everything's a product because you're actually thinking about its impact on potential TAM expansion, and you're thinking about revenue and all that. I think you have to look at it from the customer's point of view and say, for the vast majority of our customers who use our current product, would they expect this to be part of a connected workflow within the platform, or do they think that this is somewhat exogenous to what they're currently doing here? And then there's other nuanced pieces, like how are they currently solving the problem that this feature/product solves? And if the answer is they're doing it in Excel or whatever, then yeah, you could probably argue you pull it in as a feature. If they actually have another platform where they like track holidays or whatever the hell it is, right? Whatever the feature might do. If they have a whole other solution to it already, that's usually a sign that they were willing to buy two different products in this space. So you actually could justifiably claim that this is an entirely separate product, possibly with separate buyers and all that. But I think you have to look at it not from a balance sheet or not even from a technical perspective or even a product purist perspective, but just what do your customers expect and how are they currently solving the problem? And specifically your target customers, because your free customers will expect everything to be for free attached to everything, and you'll just end up with this amorphous blob of a product.
We're going to get onto messaging, but in terms of so we mentioned that as a release, not all products work, as we mentioned some mistakes there. The hardest thing is how to know when to kill a product, and sometimes you have to. How do you know when to kill a product or feature? You need enough data, but you don't want to leave it out too long. How do you make that decision?
I think trajectory, it is like the defining trait. So over time, does this product propel itself? Is it growing or dying by default? And you might do a lot of like customer marketing where you give it effectively incubation in a sense, right? You're putting on life support by like reminding your customers every month, don't forget about this thing over here, and they all try it once and then it fades away again. If it doesn't have its own momentum as a feature or a product, and if you find yourself just constantly trying to push and nudge and you can't get customers to stick to it, that's generally a sign that as a feature or product, it's not working. Now, you could rebuild it, you could do a lot of customer research, and you could find out what's going right or wrong. But like the main point is you have to actually get to the bottom of what's broken. And oftentimes it's like you had an assumption about how the market worked or how your customers thought, and you were wrong. And that's okay. That's like your job is to be right and wrong. So, and then when you're wrong, the question is what you do about it. And the answer is you end of life, which means you stop taking on new customers. You tell all the current customers, hey, I know you depend on this thing. It's going to fade away over 12 months. Here's our suggested migration path off to some other way to get it done, if indeed they care. And you just chalk it up and just make sure you go back and delete that code and fully rip it out of everything, because you don't want like these sort of zombie features hanging around.
I totally agree with you. I do want to ask, I think a lot of times, actually, sometimes the products are good, but they're messaged and communicated in the wrong way.
Mhm.
And I actually think the state of product marketing today is so shit. I always say to founders in calls, you have a billboard on Times Square, less than 10 words, sell me this pen.
Mhm. Yeah.
So few can do it at all. I hadn't thought about it. I'm not sure. It's abysmal. My question to you is, I spoke to Matt at ICONIQ. One, how do you think about the state of product marketing today? And Matt told me how amazing you are at it. So what does great product marketing mean to you?
That's very kind from Matt. I wouldn't really describe myself that way. I think that one of the reasons we think it's bad is we don't take enough of both a user-centric and a buyer-centric point of view of product marketing. So oftentimes, like we confuse something like AirPods marketing, right, which is like glorious, right? But what we mean by glorious is, one, the buyer equals the user. There's no buying committee. There's no proof points that they need, and no one's shopping based on data or competitive feature set. It's an entirely brand play. So it's very different to say to say Asana launching a new way to do Gantt charts or something like that, right? So you have to think about it from a point of view of like, not all products can go to market the same way. Tesla can market a car differently than Salesforce can market a chat client or whatever, right? So the other problem, so that's one problem, which is we always forget that. And then specifically like startup product marketing, generally it is always defaulted to, here's a big screenshot and here's a one-liner. And I think that's totally fine in a world where the screenshot is really self-evident of what is going on. So if I posted a screenshot of, like, say, Riverside FM that we're chatting on right now, I think it'd be pretty obvious what's happening, as in the product is self-evident, right? That's not the case for like a load of like B2B SaaS where it's just a load of like text input boxes and a graph. And you're like, what is this? It could be anything from payroll software to Amplitude or whatever, like anything in between. So I think you have to bear in mind, a lot of people think their product sells itself. Therefore, let's just put a big dopey screenshot up here and say like, data reinvented or something like that. And like no one has a clue what the hell is happening. I think that is the kind of like state of art at the bottom of the market. So I think like the challenge for product marketing is, one, you have to work out what do your users and buyers want to know, and they're not always the same thing. And then two, what is the best way that you can show why you're best at it? So if you think, yeah.
So if we take one, sorry, I just want to make sure we cover it. So if the buyers and the users aren't the same, do we try and hit them both with the same one? Go back to that billboard, go back to that landing page. Do we hit them both with it? Do we say, fuck it, we're not going to go for the buyer, we're just going to go for the user? Fuck it, we're just going to go for the user, not the buyer? How do you think about that?
The challenge there is really like, what is the typical adoption path for a product? So like if we take Intercom, we've been trying to avoid it so far, but like we have a beautiful inbox. We re-released it like a couple of weeks ago. It's next generation, like fanciest piece of like I would say customer support inbox product on the market. But the person who's buying Intercom and adopting Intercom, they're not actually the frontline user of the product. They're not actually, they're like the VP of support in a 2,000 person company. They actually don't even see the inbox half the time. They might see the reports that come out of it, but honestly, even in those cases, they're probably looking at that in Snowflake or something. So they're really not that in the loop. All they care about is what can you do for me, and like what slightly upmarket, like where when the buyer doesn't equal the user, the buyer's questions are basically this is going to sound quite reductive, and it kind of is, but I have two numbers to worry about, Harry. Are you going to make me money or save me money? And if so, how? And why should I believe you? And that's what the buyer wants to know, because they're just trying to like run their own P&L and get promoted, whatever. The user has a different set of concerns, which is I'm trying to do my job and get promoted. And I need to believe that your product's going to make me more effective, more performative. I'm going to enjoy using it more. It's going to like, do you work on mobile? Do you do this? Do you like, how can you support me in my life? Is basically the questions. Now, as to which goes first, you absolutely have to do both. If you're billboarding in Times Square, the actual answer would be, who's more likely to be standing in Times Square looking at that billboard, your buyers or your users? If it's your users, go with that and go for like the bottoms up adoption, like, the product-led growth adoption sort of model, where like everyone's like, oh, I wish we could use Intercom, which works well for us. Like, oh, I wish I could use that new inbox. It looks so nice, blah, blah. And then you hope that enough of that groundswell pressure pops into a VP of customer support saying, I've been hearing a lot from my team about your product. I'd love to hear what, and they'll hit you with the real questions, which are, what are your proof points? Where are your enterprise case studies? All that sort of stuff. So like, that's that's how that plays out basically.
Yeah, do you know what I find really challenging today is quite often I meet companies where actually their customer base is very horizontal. And what I mean by that is Asana, Notion, applicable for dentists and applicable for SaaS startups. And from a product messaging standpoint, oh, fuck, it's such different messaging. How do you think about effective product marketing and messaging when approaching a horizontal customer base like that? Because you have the same, I guess.
We have a version of it for sure. Like, I think Notion and Asana probably go broader again, and that people use them to plan weddings and shit like that. Like, but like, I think
and shit like that. I love
it. The standard answer you're going to hear to this is going to be something, well, if you consider a verticalized marketing play, right? Like what that would look like is you pick your top 10 industries and you nail the marketing for that specifically. So you say like Notion is for dentists or Notion is for software companies. And you pick like generally speaking, what you're looking for is industry times workflow. So like, who do you do it for and what do you do? So like in the case of Notion, Notion can be like an intranet, it can be an externally hosted website, it can model workflows, it can be a project management or project planning tool, and it can be like a to-do list, and it can be a personal knowledge storage type tool as well, right? And maybe like 4 or 5 other things. So you have those, like say 10 different ways you can use Notion, and then you have like, who are the people who use Notion? And like in that world, you've got startups, you've got like whatever, like personal productivity gurus, you've got like dentists, whatever else you have, and then you're basically looking for like, what are the most compelling, sizable use cases that we can actually play out here, and how do we market them really, really well? And the mother of this entire space for me was what was that tool Atlassian bought? The one with the like cards you can drag and drop around the place.
Oh, Trello.
Trello, yeah. Trello was the extreme end of this, right? And that, like, Trello's goal was really to create a horizontalized productivity tool, and they really were trying to avoid getting stuck into any particular hole, because they were like, we want people to use this for shopping lists, weddings, house renovations, planning software products, and all that. But inevitably, like, the problem with most of those use cases is once you start to follow the money, you end up back in B2B SaaS land, right? Like, or at least B2B land anyway, right? There's not a lot of money selling software to wedding planners. There's a lot of money selling software to IBM, so generally the money still tends to bring you home. And as a result, you end up saying, we do our best work for other businesses and we solve business problems. And here's the top 3 businesses we work in. And here's the top 3 use cases we solve. And then as you move further up market again, you'll end up playing with the Forresters and Gartners of the world, who are going to say, hey, we're doing the productivity wave for like 2023. And what category would you like to be in? So before you know it, all of your desperate attempts to horizontalize yourself, when it comes to marketing, you still need to pick a lane and say, here's what we are. Even if you're just saying it for one person, you still need to say it. Like, you can't be everything to everyone because no one will buy you. So whenever you put in a moment, you're still going to instantiate yourself in a specific, vertical times use case.
I'm so pleased you said there about, bluntly, the move up market, because I wanted to talk about this because I see this so often making mistakes with founders that I work with today. And it's like, fundamentally, first, how do you advise founders on when is the right time to start thinking about moving up market? What are the signs that they should do it?
I think if this one kind of varies a bit, but generally speaking, you have to look at like your successful customer growth and what's happening with your best customers, and that's the 2 variables you need to see. So if you think you just have loads of run room horizontally in the market, so you can just keep getting more and more customers like the ones you already have, and I mean exactly like them, and you don't have to change your product to do that, then I think you shouldn't move up market. You should just carry that growth out. Because I think, like, generally speaking, in all software, we all want the smallest possible product we could possibly have. Doesn't work out that way. Like, you're talking to somebody with like 3 different products across like 3 different use cases. But like, generally speaking, if we could have our way, we'd all have just a piece of software that's just 1 line of code and it has like no bugs and never needs anything, and it needs 1 engineer to maintain it, right? That's like the dream state. The only reason you add the 2nd and 3rd line of code is to get more customers. Yeah. And so if you can avoid having to have a massive product footprint, then you should. But generally speaking, you want growth. So if, for example, you find that, like, hey, without doing anything, like kind of taking our hands off the wheel, we're still seeing like, 3-digit percentage growth across for like loads of different people, all for the same sort of use case, and they're not coming up with really bizarre different feature requests, then stay where you are. Absolutely stay where you are. Now, the actual decision point is, if one of these 2 things is true, we can't keep growing horizontally because they're asking us for specific features. Like, the hotel customers all want a hotel booking feature, or whatever, right? Then we have to weigh up that work versus that market expansion against what would happen if we solved the needs of our largest customers and the ones that are out of reach from them. And we weigh up the value of doing that work, which is possibly not as much work because it might just be like adding roles and permissions and stuff like that onto your current platform. Then you're looking at the ROI of 2 efforts and saying which is easier, and also which keeps our business as simple as possible. And simplicity is really underrated in business in loads of ways. Honestly, I could rant about it for hours, but let's say your brand architecture just gets messier. If you had to launch 20 VC, but also for soccer teams, it'd just be weird because everyone would be like, what's Harry about, right? It's easier to say you're going to do 20 VC and you're going to do a different one for investors and a different one for founders. That's clean. That makes sense. That's on brand for you, So similarly, like, you have to think about what can our brand architecture support? And oftentimes that might just be a move up market. The other variables you have to look at is what's happening to our best customers. And one thing that happens to a lot of software companies that sell to software companies is that their best companies outgrow them really quickly, because software companies all grow really fast. And that means you're going to see somebody just whistle through your target segment and come out the other side, and you'll be there going, wow, they used to be a customer of ours. I bet you they would have paid us millions if we still kind of kept them. And you were like 4 roles and permissions and a Salesforce integration away from keeping them happy. So you have to kind of do all of this calculus against each other.
I'm so pleased you said about the importance of simplicity there, because feature creep on the product side is just the most dangerous thing, but also very common to see. How do you retain simplicity with scale and with growth of customer adoption as you think today as a product leader?
I mean, like the short answer is you don't, in my opinion. What you do is you fight as hard as possible, but you're going to lose the fight. Like you're going to end up doing something because we have hundreds of people working on Intercom. They're not all removing features, so like the product is going to get more complicated. And I think one mistake that folks make is because like oftentimes product decisions are made entirely within the product org or the R&D org, if you're so inclined. They kind of forget about the ramifications everywhere else. Like so, as an example, every complex new feature we build has to get marketed by a marketer and has to get sold by a salesperson and supported by a support person. So you have to think of like the total cost of ownership of that feature, not just how hard was it to build. Generally speaking, you're trying to find the highest leverage work, which usually involves looking for how little can we do and how much can we get from it. And like that's the forcing function of simplicity. And then for any given thing, someone will say, oh, if you just add a classic one for Intercom lore would be, if you only added these 4 more reports, you'd also be a great analytics company. To which we've always said, yes, that is possibly true. I don't fully believe it's true. But if we did do that, then we'd also have a different problem. We'd also be a fucking analytics company, right? And that has a whole other problem, which is like now we have a different brand. Now we have a different whole go-to-market message. Now we have different needs for different types of engineers, different big data storage challenges, and all that sort of stuff. So just thinking, and like our sales reps would need to know how to speak analytics and speak customer communications on the fly and adapt and all that. Like it's so the downstream ramifications of such an easy incremental piece of work are really, really easy to underestimate. And so I just, generally speaking, I think if there's ever an opportunity for simplicity that isn't massively harmful to the growth of the business, I would always try to take it.
Do you agree with the notion just raise prices? Mark Andreessen's often said on a billboard, raise prices. Do you agree with that? Dharmesh Shah from HubSpot on the show the other day said, no, it's goodwill to actually underprice your product in a lot of cases.
I think I think Mark Andreessen's point is just unnecessarily blunt, and I think Dharmesh's point is more pointy. There's substance in it. Like you're always trying to capitalize on the value you deliver for customers, and you don't want to squeeze every last drop out of it, for sure. And that's Dharmesh's point. At the same time, I think there's a danger of if you end up doing a lot of so a hard adopter of Intercom, let's say somebody uses us for everything. We are their onboarding guide, their customer support. We're how they route sales leads to to the reps to close deals. We're how they do in-app feature adoption. We're how they launch things. They're also their knowledge base, and we're sending SMSs and WhatsApps for them as well, right? You have to kind of if you want to sustain a product that's that larger footprint, it needs to be paying you back in a way such that you can reinvest and maintain the health of the product. Otherwise, you do end up in a world where you basically can't afford to work on your product in a sense, right? So you have to and HubSpot are no stranger to a price increase either. But I do think the idea of just raise prices is silly. I think align price to value is the thing you have to do, and just make sure that you're building the thing that you sell people on, and that when you sell them on it, that they're actually getting the value you're charging them for.
When we think about kind of the raising prices, moving into enterprise, a lot changes in the team structure, in the kind of resource allocation that's needed. In terms of the product, what changes with the product when you need to move up market?
There's a few big buckets that are just immovable. I'll kind of walk through them a little bit. One is just adaptability, so making sure that our large enterprises don't just pick up products randomly. They have they have an MSA they need you to sign. They have a procurement team that assesses you. You need to be SOC 2, Type 2, possibly HIPAA, possibly ISO 9000 compliant. You need to be able to do a security review and all that sort of stuff. So there's a whole piece around just adaptability, and there's other stuff like skim processing. So so people, they might mandate that you have to be able to sign into the product through the Google, through G Suite, as opposed to creating your own logins, and there's just loads of stuff like that, right? So that's all one big bucket called adaptability. Startups don't give a shit about any of that, but big companies absolutely mandate it. The other one is scalability, and I won't say much on it, just sort of you need to be able to meet their usage requirements. So if they want to send 1 million mails a minute, you need to be able to do that. And third one is justifiability. So like you need to surface the data that proves that your product is delivering the value that they're paying for. So this is often, and there's tiers to this. There's like generate your own reports, let them generate custom reports, all the way up to let them dump all of your data into their data warehouse or data lakehouse or whatever they want to call it, like a Snowflake or whatever, and get all the stuff over there so that when they're reporting out on what value they got, they can do it for you. But that's all justifiability. And then the last one I talk about is interoperability. So you actually have to be a good citizen of their tech stack. So you can't just be like, Intercom's here, delete everything else. They probably have 15 other tools that they use in conjunction with you to talk to their customers or to manage customer conversations or just the health of their customer base. And you need to like have a really good interoperability posture, meaning that you should be hydrating all the other data sources that would benefit from knowing what Intercom knows. And similarly, you should be sucking in data from them as well to make sure the Intercom is the best Intercom it can be. And in doing so, you become like what they call like an improvement to their tech stack. So in general, we would say like a support stack is better when Intercom is plugged into it. Everything gets better, not just Intercom, but interoperability. Like there's a whole world of like APIs and midware that you have to consider as to how people do it. So they're kind of like the big four, I think, that change. And like none of them, just to note for your listeners, I didn't describe a single user-facing feature that you're going to do any product marketing for, right? Like you're never going to have a sexy screenshot of the Salesforce integration or the new API calls. It's always like this behind the scenes stuff that when people say, are you enterprise ready? What they actually mean is all of that stuff. And people forget to market it. People forget to like showcase that in the right places because it's not visible. It's not something you can like do a great webinar on or whatever.
So I think adoptability is one of the most exciting places to be investing today. Like I invested in WorkOS, which obviously
Me too.
yeah, great. Perfect example. Secure Frame, which is obviously SOC 2.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's such a good space to be investing. It was Ophelia who said SaaS, PLG, and it's all kind of saturated right now, honestly. Her question was, where are you excited?
That is a good question. I one area I've been having like some, I guess, areas that get me excited is like, I think taking SaaS to industries that don't see much of it is still exciting. So like,
Do you not worry about the long sales? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm with you. And then I see the sales cycles for mining companies and the customer education process for car dealerships. And I'm like, fuck.
I think that is a problem, and I think that just needs to like that's a problem, and it causes possibly a bit of boredom for me and you because it's not as responsive as like launching on Product Hunt or whatever. I just think you need to bake that into, you know, price that into your sort of considerations, which like so I've invested in a B2B SaaS company for managing building construction projects, right? And it's going great, but definitely the long sales cycles and the like random adoption patterns and all that are like very weird to me. But the business is a monster, you know. So I think like I think it's cool to see how SaaS will ultimately transform these things. It's definitely way slower than like, hey, everyone's using this like new note-taking app or whatever, where we all adopt it in 3 days and we're all done talking about it in like 4 podcasts worth or whatever. You know, it's different to that. Like it'll take 5 years for like for in your example, like the car hire company or whatever, like it will take 5 full years for that company to realize the value of the software it built in year 1, which is just very foreign to us because we just think launch the thing already, you know.
Are there any like decks that come across where you're like, ugh, no? Like I get this, and it's so easy to do it. Like recruitment, I'm like, if I get another recruitment marketplace.
Yeah. There's a few. I think the ones that I get most bored by, anything that smacks of all your data in one place, I just really don't care about. And especially if it's consumer, like just in general, it's such a like no one actually has that problem. Just engineers realized, oh, you could connect all these things into one place. And like this is like the age old joke about like standards. Like we love standards so much, that's why we keep inventing new ones. Like, and I just think like I think fundamentally the product space, like whenever anyone's saying we're going to centralize everything, I'm like, it just sounds to me like you're going to create yet another place for things to live. It doesn't sound like you're going to solve the problem in any meaningful way. So that's one kind of meta pattern I see. I think another one where I just really get bored is like products that are actually just Google Docs. And by that, I mean like performance reviews as a product. And when you actually look at it, it's basically like, well, actually, in my last company, I had this really sweet template for doing a performance review. I asked what were your top 3 ambitions, your top 3 hopes. I asked for feedback, blah, blah, blah. And now I've turned all that into a B2B SaaS app where you have different text inputs for all of this. And I'm there going like, what is the actual benefit of the structure that you're imposing on the content? Who benefits? Why does anyone care? And then also, if you're right, this is like copyable in like 4 weeks. So like just generally whenever people are turning spreadsheets into SaaS apps has been a good idea forever. Turning glorified Google Docs into SaaS apps, I think, has never been a good idea.
I love that phrasing. It's also a bit direct, to be honest, Des. And when I spoke to Ophelia, when I spoke to Kieran, when I spoke to Matt,
Yeah.
they all kind of told me about your allergy to BS. How do you communicate that and that blunt directness in a kind of graceful way? I haven't quite mastered this.
I don't like an area I struggle with is in general is like radical candor. I think I don't say firmly enough like what I actually think. But whenever I'm trying to correct someone's thinking or at least get them onto my side, I try to like in the case of one of those startup products, I wouldn't just be like, this is bullshit, get it out of my face. I'd be like, I'd basically say like, hey, the most successful startups I see, generally speaking, have many of the following characteristics. And here they are. And I'm when I look at your idea here, what I'm not seeing is any sort of moat, or I'm not seeing anything that's unique, or I'm not, I'll try to get them on board with the sort of principles of my thinking, and then explain why this investment would like violate my thinking. And my goal is always that either they walk away saying you're full of shit, Des, which is totally fine. That's a great outcome because like they stood up to me and they said I'm going to walk away and do my own thing, or they agreed with me because I convinced them, and that's a good outcome too. And then they can correct their idea. I don't mind either of those two. Anything in between is like not good, and so I'll try to force it to one of those two outcomes, I guess.
Des,
That's maybe
what's your biggest investing miss, and did it alter how you think today?
I probably am more known for writing too many checks, so I'm probably more known from sort of like too many bad checks as opposed to any. I'm trying to think what's like. There's a few I couldn't get it together to do on time, or did too late, or whatever. So Polywork is one where I still think there's an interesting future ahead of them. And I basically just couldn't get the paperwork together. Like just one of the downsides of being an operator, genuinely, like as in someone who has a job when you're trying to invest, is you're just getting hit with like DocuSigns left, right, and center, or like due diligence things, or like oftentimes it'll be like, hey, we have to form this other company, which is a special purpose vehicle to make this investment, and you just sign these 7 things and all. So that sort of stuff is what we're more likely. I'm likely to scupper, because in general I'm probably more likely to have a go than not. I'm trying to think if I've ever actually been like that was a total miss. There's a few I think will turn out to be a miss. There's a startup developer tool called Roadie that I should have invested in when I was given the first chance, and I think that will work out. Incident.io would be another one. There's been ones where because I invested in one area, in one product, I couldn't invest in another. And the other one has been the right investment, if you know what I mean. So there's ones I've called wrong that way. I'm trying to think if I ever said no to any. I mean, no, like anything else, I'd forgive myself because I didn't have the money at the time. Like there was a chance to invest in SpaceX, but like I didn't have 100 grand, and that was the smallest check. And I'm just like, hey, like I probably should have borrowed that money, but like I didn't have it. So like, c'est la vie, you know. Those sort of ones I forgive myself on. Honestly, I expect to be back here in like 5 years' time saying, Des, you've lost famously over $1 million in startup investing. Tell me, what one did you get right?
Des, do you mind if we slightly run over?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, I'm just too interested on the startup checks there. The thing I always advise new angels: consistency of check size. You do not pretend like you know more about one company than you do another. Know your check size and stick to it. Did you do that? Do you have consistency?
Kind of. The only thing I do is if I really believe, I go like my check sizes might be like somewhere in like the 25k region, unless I absolutely love the product, love the space, and I've just been blown away. In which case, I'll push for more and I'll take what I can get. But like honestly, the nature of an investor like me is like people see me as a jigsaw piece. Like when it comes to check sizing, they're like, hey, we have a gap of blah that can go to Des or whatever. I'm never like I know what it's like on the other side, so I'm never going to be the guy constantly bullying my way and going, no, give me 300 grand or whatever. But so I'd say I have 2 sizes, basically normal, and I really think this is a monster. And I'd say I've only done like 5 of the latter category.
I'm totally with you. Can I ask, do you do follow-ons? How do you think about reserves? It was interesting.
I,
I interviewed Dharmesh Shah, and he said, I don't
never.
ever do a
Yeah,
founder meeting.
yeah,
Takes too long. I never do DD. I
yeah,
never do follow-ons. My three
yeah.
rules.
Yeah, I follow closely. I try to avoid meetings unless someone tells me like, no, no, the dude will really sell you on the idea or whatever. Um, so I try not to do those. I definitely don't do due diligence at all. But at the same time, I always caveat my check and say like, I'm only doing this if there's a lead investor who is actually going to do due diligence. If you know what I mean. So like, as in, don't consider this a commitment until you tell me that somebody is actually going to do the homework here. Like, prove to me the company exists, type of thing.
No, I do want to discuss one final element. You mentioned before having a newborn, and it's your second. Children
Hmm.
are such an impactful part of one's life. And you said before about the intersection of parenting and leadership. What did you mean by this intersection, and how do they come together?
I think there's a lot of things that you have to be good at for both. That's the first thing I'd say. Like, what you realize with a kid is um, you have to like be their how do you say their willpower. You have to be their discipline. And unlike yourself, like let's say you're trying to obey a diet yourself, you have a very closed loop feedback mechanism there. Overeat, gain weight, eat less, lose weight, whatever. Exercise, feel good. Don't exercise, feel bad. Whereas when you're trying to like discipline a kid, and not discipline, that's the wrong word, but like when you're trying to like raise a child, um, you're trying to say eat healthy, but it doesn't actually affect you whether or not you do it. And in fact, the feedback mechanism you'll find out over 5 years, not in the next like 5 days, right? Because it's not your body. So it requires you to have a lot of like care and empathy and compassion for something that isn't directly felt like physically by you, and you're trying to make that happen over like many years as opposed to like many days or like any sort of better feedback thing. And if you're trying to lead a group of people in a business, there's a lot of similarity there in that you're trying to get everyone on the same page and get them supported and have them understand the principles by which you're trying to push towards certain things. You're hoping that they're aligned, and you're hoping that like that alignment won't disappear once you leave the room or whatever. And you're hoping that the payoff over many years will make them realize that actually, hey, that was actually, you know, he or she was looking out for me at the time. So that's one whole category, which is just understanding like how to communicate your best intent for them, for people, without like micromanaging, because you can't be there every second of your kid's life, because you're not going to. Once they walk out the door, they can do whatever they want, you know. So like there's a lot of that. The other area where I reflect on a lot is it's a great blog post. I can't remember who wrote it, but somebody will augment, I'm sure. It's called Being Demanding and Supportive. So like that is, you have to be both of a child or of like people who you work with. And I really do mean work with. Like you have to have this stance towards your peers as well. You have to be both. You have to like ask so much of them to make them realize their true potential. And that's the demanding side. But then you also have to be willing to support them should they ever struggle or ever bump into any barriers or whatever. And like, so you have to basically say like, I think you can actually change the world. I think you're one of the best principal engineers I've ever seen. And I actually think you represent the products you build, represent the future of this company. I need you to go and do this really, really hard technical thing for me. And then off they go and do it. But if they fail, which they may, you need to step in and say, to be honest, that was beyond any of us. Like it was a ridiculous effort, but you made a phenomenal effort at it. And look, and I'm here to cover for you. Don't think that this has been a bad outcome.
What if it wasn't beyond any of us? What if you should have been able to do it? I've been let down by people, by hires. I've thought more of them. I think I don't mean this arrogantly. I'm not smart, but I will fucking kill myself to get stuff done, and I don't always find that with people, and then
Yeah.
I feel let down, and it's
Mhm.
not okay actually, and I'm upset.
Yeah, I think that's so like that's the other side of performance management. And I think in those cases, like when I engage the demanding but supportive mode, it's much more like pushing people to be the very best. It's rare you'd try that with somebody who you have doubts about, because you're trying to push them to perform to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think in those cases you have to move to a slightly more structured type of conversation, which is like I mean structured not in the sense of like a pip or anything, but I mean when you're asking something to do something that you think they should be able to do, but you have suspicion that they might not, I think you need to outline, here's what I think needs to be done. Here's the sort of time frame I think it needs to be done at. Here's the level of quality I think it needs to be done at. And here's the expectation. Like, I think this is really likely that we'll get this done. Do you agree? And they say yes or no. And if they say no, then you're just on a different page about their capability in a sense, or what's reasonable. So then you shouldn't be working with them. But if they say yes, then the only other question is like, if any of that changes, let me know, because this is a really important piece of work. So if you have suspicion that the timeline is wrong, that the complexity is greater than we thought, that the quality bar is lower, you need to like let me know, because we need to correct this course quickly, because you're working on something really important here. You know.
Final one for a quick fire, I promise. I've made many hiring mistakes in my time, and not such a long time. But tell me, what have been the biggest hiring mistakes you've made?
Probably earlier in my career, just being blinded by the logo, I think was probably the biggest thing. Like, such and such a person worked at such and such a company, and you're in your head as a naive younger founder, it's hard to not to like autocomplete to, therefore what happened to that company is going to happen to us, because we just got their head of recruiting, or their head of people, or their head of marketing, or their head of sales. And I had to say hello there, because I didn't want to imply it was any particular role. But that's probably the single biggest thing, is like assuming that because somebody worked there, they were responsible for anything. And I think even the greatest companies on earth, and I really do mean this, have a few people who aren't high on the causation index, if you know what I mean. Like, they happened to be in a great company during a period of greatness, but they didn't have their hand on the wheel. They weren't responsible for causing a lot of it. However, their LinkedIn looks like fire. You know what I mean? Like they look like an absolute superstar, and it's only really when you ask them to repeat the magic that you realize they were actually the magician's assistant.
So I think one of the biggest bullshit things is only hire 18 players. I don't know if you disagree with me here. I don't think there's enough 18 players. If we're doing true 18 players at scale, how many people are in Intercom right now?
1,000.
1,000 18 players.
Yeah.
I think the definition of A team is a little bit skewed. Like, I don't mean that rudely I'm not saying to you specifically, but like, that doesn't work. And okay is sometimes good enough in certain roles.
I think so there's a few different things there. One is like, it's not like hire for potential, not for like state, you know. Like, when we hire somebody, if we hire like a fresh college graduate today in Intercom, they're not our best engineer. And I think everyone should get that. And by definition, their like current state is not A team. They are like, the question is, are they on a positive trajectory? Can they get there? Or can they get to what some companies call like the acceptable like sort of final level? Like, so as in, if you join Intercom and it turns out like you end up being like our senior manager of podcasting or something like that, right? Like, the question is like, are we okay with you staying there, or do we need you to become the director? Do we need you to become a VP? Because the person who holds that position in succession planning needs to be on a very positive, rapid career trajectory. So you have to ask those questions. And then there are some areas where, yeah, like you actually literally can't have like 9 people on a team all thinking they're going to be the manager, because then 8 of them are going to quit. So like you need to kind of like, so you're always trying to fuse youth, like not youth, like early in their career with like mid-stage career, with late-stage career. You're trying to fuse like a relative ambition to where they are in their career at the moment, actual capability. Like, we actually have experts who are superstars, like, who are whatever, I don't know what you want to call them, like A+ in your analogy or whatever. And you need all, like, the ingredients of a team is not like just a load of people all walking around telling each other they're best. Like, you actually need a mix, and people come to companies to learn. And by definition, that means they're not the best. They believe they can get better. So like, I think there's a lot of like nonsense behind the like A's hire A's, B's hire C's, don't only hire A's, blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't go as far maybe as you and say like you're always going to go out to market looking for like the best person you can get in a position. But there's times when you operate relative best and when you operate global best. And the chances of you operating finding the globally best person is pretty slim. There are times when it's worth the effort. But relative best, meaning we're going to bring somebody in who's going to be at the top of the org, who's going to set a new standard for us. This time, you probably pull that lever an awful lot more.
And it's worth the effort when it's a head of function?
Probably, unless the function's already like dialed and it actually, oftentimes you have to remind, oftentimes hires are made for good reason to bias towards like previous missteps. So your last leader might have been like very hardcore, like bruiser, like, tough talker, like harsh person to work for. And you might need to kind of like inject a little bit different DNA to kind of soften the org a little bit deliberately, because turns out that can result in like toxicity or turnover or whatever. Similarly, the exact inverse is true. Maybe you need some teams to actually get a bit more firm and business focused and less casual. And as a result, so it's not like you're looking for the best person for where your business is at, for where that function is at, and where that team is at in any given moment. And you understand that like it's very rare you're hiring for the rest of your life in their career. You're hiring for like chunks. You're hiring for like contracts of a season, like of like 4 or 5 year stints or whatever is generally the sort of norm. Because in 4 or 5 years, Intercom will be a lot bigger and a lot more complex with a lot of new problems than it is today, and certainly than it was 5 years ago too.
Des, I want to move into a quick fire. I could talk to you all day. So I want to move into a quick fire. I say a short statement, you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great.
So what's the favorite book, Des?
I think it's probably How Will You Measure Your Life by Clay Christensen.
Why?
I think because he takes a lot of business strategy rules and applies them to your personal life. And it touches on everything from your own growth, your own ambition, your relationship with your parents, your relationship with your children, legacy, defensiveness, like where are you uniquely good in the world, where should you just be the same as everyone else. He applies a lot of those principles, like what should you outsource in your life, what should you do, all that sort of stuff, and it maps really, really well, and ultimately it does actually begin to answer that question of how will you measure your life.
What's the hardest element of your role with Intercom today?
I think prioritization, like finding the most highest leverage activities and then saying no to folks who have like the most -1 or whatever, picking the thing that is also really important that we just can't do.
What piece of advice do you often give but find hard to follow yourself?
Either focus or like the idea of like don't work on the most important thing and don't work on anything else. Like I say that to folks a lot, and then when I look at my own calendar and ask myself, am I living that advice? Oftentimes the answer is no. Like if it was, I wouldn't even be on this call.
Yeah, no, I totally get you. What do you know now that you wish you'd known at the start of Intercom?
From a business perspective,
Could be anything. Could be personal, could be business.
like the thing that would have given me most solace at the start would be knowing how it all was going to work out so far. Because I think like the anxiety and all that, like when you're starting out, is so intense. Of just like what if this breaks, what if that kills us, what if this happens, oh, Zendesk just released a feature, should we pack up and go home, like I tend to like be more on the sort of like I tend to like that Doctor Strange character. I see all possible outcomes, and I see all the ways in which things can go wrong and right, but there's oftentimes more things that can go wrong. So I think that would have given me some solace. But more practically, things that I wish I knew, I think probably just like I have a much crisper model of how software exists and works, and like market size versus product size, and like how all those things interchange. Like how decisions about like adding a feature is actually a decision about adding a headcount, which actually confuses brand, which affects LTV CAC in the long term. And knowing how that whole system is connected is something I've like substantially more clarity on now than I did when I was running around giving all those talks in 2011, telling everyone how the world works.
Tell me, what would you most like to change about the world of startups? So for me, it's like the event goers. You know, the people that are at every event. Hey, 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 shaking hands. The
Yeah.
sceney people. Fucking hate them.
I think so. Like the scene is just generally a thing. I think like what I'd love to change is that I would love there to be one technology publication that has two traits. One, it's run by people who like technology, like as in they believe it generally can be a cause for good in the world. And two, it is optimistic. It actually like it believes of all the probable paths, a good one might happen. And I think our industry is starved of that right now. And it's like it's not, it's got a lot of the ones that don't fall into that category.
I agree with you. Yeah, tough to change. Tell me, final one. Next 5 years for you and the plan ahead. If we have this chat in 2027, where do you
Mhm.
want to be?
Personally, I would love to be with like, you know, with Martha, the parent of an 8-year-old and a 5 years and 9-month-year-old or whatever, sitting here in Dublin. And I think if I could change anything, maybe it would be like sorry, if I any sort of professional development I'd love to make. I think I suspect I would still be in Intercom. I think maybe my role would change again. I'd probably like maybe vacate my current role and make space for somebody else and find a new area to invest myself. Um,
If I could take one thing away from your current role, which would make it immeasurably better, what would I take away?
like the thing would be like pressure in a sense. So like um, the the all of the employee headcount, all of the the trials and tribulations, whether it's in the industry right now or whatever, all of that kind of it definitely like occupies like a reasonable chunk of my mind at any given moment. Like I can be in the cinema watching Top Gun, but at least 28% of my mind is thinking about things that might go wrong in Intercom or might go wrong in the industry and how they might get better again. And I would love to be able to find a way just to dial that down by cut that in half maybe. I don't mind like I always think about things the same way I think about is my daughter safe in school and blah 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 and what'll the weather be like tomorrow. But like I do think at times it takes an outsized percentage of my brain is just worrying about like stuff like that.
I think the one thing they never tell you in starting your own business is that there's never an end to the day. There is
Yeah,
always more you can do, and you will
yeah.
never not have that if you are doing it well. And I wish someone had told me that.
It's doubly true for folks like us where like the software industry really wakes up in like 10 minutes time at 4 p.m.
Yeah.
When it's like 8 a.m. in San Francisco. And I think that's like one of the downsides of trying to operate a global, but like let's just say San Francisco biased business from Dublin is that like you get a clean run of the day and just as all your friends are packing up over in Dublin, ready to go home and go for a pint or whatever, that's when work starts. And I think that is that's a type of pressure that's just a bit tough at times.
Des, final one. What's your biggest insecurity today? Like mine is I'm looking at, my book value over the last few years and I'm like, fuck, I'm a great investor. And then I'm looking at some of it today and I'm going, fuck, I may not be such
Yeah.
a good fucking investor.
Yeah. I think I guess I I hope Intercom to be like one of max two, but possibly one of one. Hopefully one of one businesses I ever like go to the mat on this hard for this long. And I think the thing I care most about is like at this point, like it's not so much me, but it's just making sure that everyone who's taken the journey, like that they look back on it really fondly and that it works out for everyone. It's a meaningful outcome for everyone. I think that's the thing I probably like care most about, and it's the thing I'm also like I always feel like we have to fight harder, we have to do this, we have to do that, or whatever. Like it's like it's back to the 28% worry thing I was describing. I'm always paranoid of what can go wrong, and I think that bakes a type of insecurity into my mind, which is like it's very easy to convince me that something bad's going to happen. Because I'll immediately get on board with it and I'll like prophesize the worst version of it. So I think that's if I could click my fingers and take anything out of my personality, I think would be probably to have more just robustness. But randomly, as a side note, like getting in shape and getting healthy and doing weights and all that really helped here. And that like I feel like strong body, strong mind, or whatever. Like it definitely made me more like no. I am strong, Intercom strong. We can get through this. This is just a blip. It's just one customer. What's the big deal? Whereas like, honestly, like 12 months prior, it would have been something like, oh my God, well, what if everyone else here is the day quit? Like, so I think there's definitely something there for sure.
Des, listen, I've absolutely loved this. Thank you so much for elongating 20 VC, well beyond 20 VC to 80 VC. Maybe we've got a franchise going here. But honestly, man, this has been such a joy to do.
Cool. Thanks so much for the chat, Harry. I really enjoyed it.